Hello, everybody, and welcome in to the first edition of Carallel's Caregiver Conversation Series of 2024. Thanks for joining us today. Matt Perrin, Director of Caregiver Engagement here at Carallel, back with you. And pleased to be joined today by Elizabeth Clubb. How are you, Elizabeth?
I am great, Matt, and just delighted to be here with you and everyone on the Zoom.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And we're delighted to have you. So, Elizabeth, as you probably saw in all the registration details, Elizabeth is well, first and foremost, a former family caregiver, number one for these conversations, and also founder and CEO of myFloc. That's right, Elizabeth?
That is correct, and I would also but like to correct, I am a current family caregiver as well. So
Current. Okay.
yes,
Thank you
yes,
I'm
yep,
really glad you corrected me there.
yep, yep.
Um, so today's topic is one, as I guess they all are, that's near and dear to my heart based on my own caregiving experience. But financial caregiving. So that's the topic today. And if you're joining one of these sessions for the first time, thanks for being here. A little bit of housekeeping before we jump in. First and foremost, just a tidbit on Carallel. We're a caregiver support company. Our mission is to make caregiving easier. And we do that in a couple primary ways. First and foremost, with our team of care advocates who are providing one-on-one personalized support to caregivers for whatever challenges they might have on their plate. We do that over the phone, through email, and via chat. And we complement that one-on-one support with our digital experience called My Care Desk by Carallel. And I think of that as a one-stop online shop for all things caregiving, educational articles, helpful videos, like recordings of these sessions, practical tools that you can use in your day-to-day. So, and we make our service available through health plans and employers across the country. So if you're not sure whether or not you have access to Carallel, ask your employer or ask your health plan. So that's a quick tidbit on Carallel. Elizabeth, can you just give us a quick, highest level intro on myFloc? In my words, not yours, but the way it strikes me, myFloc is really, it exists to make financial caregiving easier.
It
Again, my
does.
words, not yours, but can you give me a quick tidbit on myFloc?
Yep. Yep. Super high level. MyFloc is a financial technology platform focused on really taking the financial friction out of caregiving. Matt, as you mentioned, I was a financial caregiver for my dad, though I didn't call myself a financial caregiver. I called myself a daughter. I am now a caregiver for my mother. And I also, in that role, call myself a daughter, but it was too hard. And going through that experience, I said, there's got to be a better way to do this financial caregiving. And so that's what prompted me to build myFloc and really to help families, older adults and families, and really all of us to really do money together better is what we
Mm-hmm.
call it.
I love it. I love it. Do
Yep.
money together better. That's awesome. And we're going to talk quite a bit more about myFloc, later in the discussion. For very, very good reason, because it's a tool that can help us and make all of our lives easier when it comes to financial management and financial caregiving. So a couple of other pieces of housekeeping, Elizabeth, before we jump in. First and foremost, these are conversations by design. So as we're talking about financial caregiving, and that's really what this is, Elizabeth and I, two caregivers having a chat with a bunch of other caregivers. That's how we think about it. If you have perspectives to share, questions to ask, anything like that, please do drop them in the chat, or you can use the Q&A function down at the bottom of your panel there on Zoom. I think that is it for housekeeping, Elizabeth. Keep me honest. Did I miss anything?
I think you got it. That's great.
All right, there we go. Look at that. 3.5 minutes. That might be a record, but yeah. So we, Elizabeth, on these sessions, we try and be very, very practical, and keep it real, as they say. So today that means a few different things. I want to talk about what financial caregiving is, right?
Yep.
When you're talking about your own experience, you mentioned, you were a caregiver, but you thought of yourself or called yourself a daughter. Similar type of action on financial caregiving and some of the jargon we use when we're talking about caregiving. So I want to just level set on what financial caregiving it is. As we're doing that, it'll certainly come out, why it's so stressful. or time consuming or both. And then, want to talk about, most importantly, how we can make it easier on ourselves. And that's where myFloc and a number of other points we want to make will come in. So that's the focus. How does that sound?
Perfect.
All right,
Let's do
let's
it.
do it. Let's do it. So my question to you, Elizabeth, is how would you describe financial caregiving? What is it?
Yeah, I think it's a continuum. So I think it can range from helping with shopping all the way to financial management, taxes, bill pay, all of those things. And I think that's one of the interesting parts of financial caregiving is that you don't necessarily know when it's starting, but then you can see it building over time. And there is one of the big issues I think around financial caregiving is really the emotional part of it because money can be very emotional for families. It can be very emotional for individuals. It plays a different role in every family. And so starting the conversation around helping each other with money can feel awkward. And then how that progresses over time can feel awkward. So to your point, it can be healthcare bills, it can be taxes, it can be just checking accounts and bill pay and all of those things. And unfortunately, those things can add up. Matt, to your point, that it's stressful for the reasons that it's hard to do. But there's an additional stress of money is really an identity thing for people. So how they've dealt with money their whole lives. And it's so interesting in our world to hear how different families have dealt with money. You always assume that everyone sort of did it the way you did it. And that's not the case. And that's one of the complexities of the financial caregiving.
Yeah, yeah. I just so much of what you're saying resonates with me there, and it's not a short answer if I were to be asked, like, what for me, what made financial caregiving, or the financial aspect of caregiving, however we want to say it, what made that so stressful and like such a heavy weight. It's not a short answer, but you hit on one of them, which is and also when you use the word friction earlier, right? Like, we wear a bazillion different hats when we're caring for someone else. And we're the scheduler, we're the healthcare provider, we're the companion, we're the son, the daughter, the spouse, the partner. We're wearing just so many different hats. And the financial caregiving, the financial manager hat, I guess, for me was just really it felt full of friction, not to play on your word, but like it just felt hard because it wasn't a comfort area of me. Like, I can go schedule appointments, I can get my mom there, I can be her companion, I could do all those things, but like it just was a loaded topic, right? On top of it, on top of everything else.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a loaded topic emotionally, but it's also at a pragmatic level. The systems are not set up for
Yeah,
financial caregiving, right?
yeah,
So a lot
right.
of people do it by like using your mom's login,
Mm-hmm.
right? And knowing that that's you really shouldn't be doing that, right?
Yeah,
But you have to get
yeah,
around it. Like it's
yeah,
some of those things. And so that part of it is challenging. And then there are things like going, getting help with errands, and there's receipts and all of those little things where when you wake up, you're like, why am I spending my time doing this?
yeah, right.
Right,
Yeah,
when I could be spending time together. And
yeah,
that's the part of it where we knew there's technology that can help with those pieces of it.
yeah,
Why aren't we applying it to financial caregiving, those technologies, so that we can the emotional part of it is hard enough, right?
yeah,
And so when you then layer on the like, this is ridiculous that I have to,
yeah, right.
do it this way, it is complicated. So it's layers of baggage in an
Yeah.
interesting way.
Yep, yep. It's in my situation, I was living about 3 hours away from my mom, and I remember I had her Rockland Trust, her bank card. I had an extra one for me that I had two extra ones for me made, and one for that I kept, and one that I left in like a particular spot in my mom's place, so that the network of people, my uncle and other friends, or other just sometimes random people who were helping me because I wasn't there, I
Yep.
tell them where the card is, and
Yep.
like and do it with the kind of like, oh man, okay, I can't believe I'm doing this. But you're right, like it just that's what like as caregivers, we're solving problems, and to me that
Right,
made I was solving a problem.
right. You had no other
So
options.
yeah, yeah. And then the other aspect, the undercurrent of it was I was I was often sort of just fear, like we're always waiting for another shoe to drop, I feel like, when you're in the midst of a caregiving experience, and it could be any type of shoe. But the financial caregiving shoe was always one of those shoes that I was waiting for and scared of, because scams and fraud and all of that other stuff that I was
Yep.
just afraid of. So that's yet another layer to all of it, right?
It is another layer to all of it. And that's one of the things that, so in my situation, I was the financial caregiver for my father. I live in Atlanta. My father lived in New York. And my father's solution was give anybody his checkbook. That was his solution when he
Yeah,
could no longer do things himself, which it was, I had all that anxiety.
yeah,
And I would log in. I was on his bank account, so I would log in sort of at the end of the month because I was trying to live my life as well and not know what I was going to see.
right.
And that always that fear. And what was interesting is that my dad, one of the worst parts about it for me was I was worried that he was going to be a victim of fraud, and he was worried that he was going to be a victim of fraud or
Wow.
financial
Yeah.
exploitation. And that part of it, that fear that people have, both caregivers and people as they get older, because older adults are targeted
Yeah.
because of a number of reasons. They're more trusting, and they control a lot of wealth in this country, and so there's a good reason to be afraid,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we shouldn't have to be afraid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And wow, you just hit on something. My caregiving situation was my mom was living with Alzheimer's disease, dementia, and never not this is just sort of on the periphery of what we're talking about, but somewhat related. But I'll never forget the first time that my mom, because she was also paranoid, but when she accused me of stealing from her, right? Stealing her money, and which became a common thing, which isn't uncommon, and as people
dementia.
are moving further into, life with dementia. But anyway, we or at least I do, as the host on these sessions, I share. So as you were talking, Elizabeth, that struck a chord with me. But
Yeah,
uh so
it's difficult.
you know what so, like, I guess another open-ended question, take it in any direction. I mean, I have my thoughts that I'll share, but I'll start with you. Is like, how do we make it easier, right? How do we, as caregivers, how can we make it easier on ourselves? Because the reality of it is, we talk about, like, I talk about leaving my mom's debit card in a certain spot and telling people when they needed to know where it was, and
Right.
you with the checkbook, and I'm sure we all have our stuff, right? Because the reason for that is we're all just doing the best we can. We're trying to trying to
Yep.
do the best we can. Um, but stepping back, how, what are some of your thoughts on how we can make it easier on
So
ourselves?
I think, Matt, one of the things that we are big proponents of is talking about money earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and often. I think I'm sure you hear the stories that there's this whole concept around we're going to have the talk around money, and
Mm-hmm.
that whole notion of having this big one-time talk, we want to sort of abolish, because
Mm-hmm.
it ends up being this a big emotional thing, and we as a society don't do a good job of talking about money.
Mm-hmm.
It's tied to emotions, it's tied to identity, it's tied to all of these things, and we're trying to normalize those conversations so that people can start, particularly we'll talk about families, can start having the conversations earlier and have them more
Mm-hmm.
often,
Mm-hmm.
because this isn't a one-time deal. We talk about becoming a victim of fraud or scam. The scam artists are smarter than we are. We're all
Mm-hmm.
going to be victims in some way or another. We
Mm-hmm.
have to figure out how to talk about these things to care for one another and really normalize those conversations. So having the conversations before you need to have the conversations is what we want to do, and have them often, and then really being respectful of the identity of the other people. And that's hard. I was thinking about this conversation this morning. When we're in caregiving conversations with our parents, all of our childhood stuff kind of comes up sometimes, and you
Yeah.
have all those feelings of what we're switching, and I'm caring for one another. And there's a lot of personal emotion. There's a lot of emotion on the part of your parents, and really being gentle with one another and listening much more, and really understanding, being empathetic to where people are, I think is something we all need to do a better job at in general, but specifically in caregiving situations. So I think that really having that mindset of we're in this together. And that's one of the things that's really important to us at myFloc. We talk a lot about how we do money together
Hmm.
because we really are in this together. Like even the people, you and I are in this together, Matt, and the
Yeah.
people all on this call, we're all in this together. We need to help each other.
Yeah.
And I think having that mindset of us, not why did you do this, but how can we help figure
Hmm.
this out for all of us, is one of the things that we like to talk about a lot.
Yeah. Um, I couldn't agree more. And you're hitting on a lot of common threads that sort of apply to a lot of caregiving, just in terms
Yeah.
of expectations and perspective. So I'm here for it for sure. Um, the as I was thinking about the question before our call, I jotted down a few things, and the first item on my list was talking about it. It just was really it was that was I know for all the reasons you're talking about, and
Yeah.
probably my own personal stuff. It was hard with my mom, and the reality of it is, as you say, um, it's not one conversation, or it shouldn't be. It should be a series um, of conversations over a period of time, and ideally, better better early than later. So yeah, I appreciate hearing you share that perspective about having the conversation. Um, but you're right. Like there's a lot of tactical sort
Yeah.
of stuff that goes into having it successfully.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
success is a I'm using that word broadly, because the first
Right.
time I tried to have a conversation with my mom, it was not a success, but we kept
Right.
at it,
Yep.
and and eventually, not because I had any great foresight, but eventually I'm thankful that I was able to get around to taking kind of a team approach, as you're talking about, right?
Right.
And yeah, so
And I think, Matt, that part of it is when starting the conversation, being very aware of your own feelings going in, and being very sensitive to getting your, let's just use a parent as an example, really tuned into what your parent is feeling. And
mhm,
if you start having, I think you need a safe spot,
mhm,
a safe place to do that emotionally. And, and so if that place starts feeling unsafe, if people start getting emotional and feeling stressed about it, stop it. You
yeah,
don't have
right,
to keep going just because you started.
yeah,
You can come
yeah,
back to it and just
yeah,
say, let's circle back. Let's talk about this another time. Let's come back and, let's do something fun together now. And
yeah,
so really sort of trying to make it so it isn't this big dramatic thing, but being really tuned to, because especially with older adults, um, lots of life identity is tied around money and competence.
mm,
And so really being aware of that and tuned into that, I think is hard. And it was hard for me with my dad to think about my dad's decline in,
mhm.
his physical decline. He had Parkinson's disease, but also his cognitive decline. So it's a really emotional thing, and being aware of that and giving yourself a break as well,
Yeah.
and being kind to yourself, I think is super important.
Agreed, agreed. And you talk about spaces and places, and you were kind of, uh, you know, primarily talking about emotional places and spaces, and sort of state of mind and readiness for the conversation on our part as a caregiver and on our loved ones. But it's also like the physical, right?
Yeah,
Picking the right time and place, the set and setting of having the conversation when at a time when you think you probably won't be distracted and everyone's comfortable, and
right.
all of that. Like those are little things. And I'm just going to drop it's just so interesting with timing. We every 2 weeks we have an email newsletter at Carallel. It's called Dear Carallel, where we take questions from from caregivers from across the country, and our care advocates answer them. And last week's was, how do I talk to my mom about money? We didn't plan that, I promise, but I'm going to drop the link to that in the chat in a moment here. But we go into a little bit more detail on some of the tactical things as it relates to starting the conversation. So, um,
Yep.
so uh, and just a reminder to the audience, if you guys do have questions, perspectives to share, please feel free to share them. We'll do our best to address here as we're talking, or be sure to do so after the session. So, and I looked like I cut you off there, Elizabeth. Sorry about
No,
that.
you didn't. You didn't cut me off.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention to folks on the call and just to have a brief conversation about it, because you brought up your mom. My father had Parkinson's disease, and so one of the earliest older adults, their cognition around finances changes, just a matter of aging. It's not a they get unsmart. It is just that part of your brain changes. And so I think we also need to be aware of that, but also respectful of that. So when people are victims of fraud or financial exploitation, one of the really interesting things about that is it's still one of the only crimes where there's a tendency to blame the victim.
Right.
And so it's sort of, why did you fall for that? Or how could you have? And we, as a society and as caregivers, really need to not do that, because that makes it so people won't talk about it. And then there's shame and all of those things involved, which we want to avoid. Shame is a really terrible thing, and it can impact your health. And we want to really encourage open conversation. So I think in terms of talking about it, really on the fraud side, is really seeking to understand first. And I think
Yes.
that's what I always have in my mind when when mom tells me something, and I'm like, huh, that sounds interesting. And before I have a truth be told, I have a visceral reaction when she tells me something like, "Oh, the support people from Apple called me and they're going to help." I like that rise in my like, what happened? But I'm like, huh, why don't we talk more about what they told you, right?
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
really seeking to understand first, and being really sort of gentle in those conversations, I think is important, because we want the openness in discussion so we can help protect each other.
Yeah, and we didn't even talk about that, but that is one of my favorite phrases: seek to understand.
Seek
So,
to understand.
yet another reason why I'm so happy to have you here, Elizabeth. Like,
Yeah.
just hit the nail on the head, and couldn't be more true with what you're sharing there. Um, so I'm looking at the clock, and as I told you before, time flies when we're having fun. So I wanted to just circle back here. When I was thinking about this for the question of how can we make financial caregiving easier ahead of time, as I mentioned, first thing I jotted down was talking about it.
Yep.
It was hard for me to do. The second was organization, which I'm going to bypass only because um, I mean, it was a challenge as it related to financial caregiving, but we talk a lot about organization on all sorts of different topics. So I'm going to bypass that. But the third was use tools that are available to me. And so I wanted to talk about one tool in particular here, that wasn't available to me when I was in the midst of my caregiving experience, but would love to hear a little bit more about myFloc and how, whether people on the call have access to Carallel service through their health plan or employer or not, how they learn more about myFloc and how they might be able to use it. So can you tell
Sure.
us a little bit about it? Like, what is it?
Yep.
We know why you started it at this point.
Yep. Yep.
Given your own, I love anything that's born out of someone's personal lived experience. So
Yep.
love that. But what is it? How does it work?
Yep.
Um, yeah.
Super quick, because we're running up on time. But myFloc is a financial technology platform really about empowering older adults, and that's important because we're not taking away older adult agency. It is a new FDIC insured bank account, easily set up online. And it has a series of roles, and notifications. So the base of the product is it's a series of debit cards that are funded. The new bank account is funded from the older adult's money in the base case. It's their money in the account, but that money is meant to be used for monthly expenses, grocery shopping, anything on a regular basis, but it's really a monthly spending account. You can also put recurring bills on that account, and so there's visibility. There's a series of cards associated with it. So your mom can use a card, but we also have a role called an insider, which is a person who can help with that account. It's a trusted role, but importantly, a power of attorney is not necessary for that role. So it's a much easier lift for a family to start with. And then with it, there's a series of other cards that can be used by other family members that we call myFloc team members. They have cards, or non-kin caregivers, neighbors or friends who help, or even professional caregivers who are coming into the home can have a myFloc card. And the money on those cards are moved down from the primary account to the myFloc team member cards, and that's all the money that can be spent. So if there's $200 on the card,
I see.
and there's card controls, but they can, in your instance, Matt, with your mom, if you had had your mom on myFloc, you would have been able to have, those neighbors would have had a myFloc card.
I
And
see.
so they could have spent off of that myFloc card, and Matt from New Hampshire would have been able to see what was going on with your
I
mom.
see. I see.
So it's about visibility and transparency, and really making the invisible visible so everyone's on one platform.
Hmm.
And then there's some card controls and things like that that make it easier for people to share and to feel safe in giving a card to somebody. But it provides protection, but it also provides empowerment. So it's
Hmm.
your mom is not, her agency as an adult is not taken away. She is in control, but she has the support and help that she needs in a safe way.
I love that. I love that combination, because that, and you're hitting, it seems like something that's at the core of your product, which is sort of protection, but with empowerment. That sort of interplay
Yep.
there. You're hitting on something that is another common thread, and basically all conversations that we have, which is around um you know living life, empowering others to
Yep.
live life. And sometimes to us that means empowering the caregiver that we're working with, or it means empowering the person they're caring for by empowering the caregiver. It's all, so I love that interplay there. Um and the other thing that struck me is like it's purpose, like it's connected to a main checking account, for example, and but there's a certain amount of money in there, right? That's
Right.
decided upon by the collective you. It's not
Right.
everything, right? So if something were to
Correct.
happen,
Yep.
they can't.
And that's and so it protects all the other accounts, this new account.
Got it.
And we ideally don't use cash, don't use checks. Check fraud is unfortunately going up as well. If everything is on the myFloc account, then Matt can see from where you are what's happening. And if something's changing with your mom, I use it with my mom. If something's changing, I know, and I can
Yeah.
call her and say what's going on. It's a way to connect in a sort of unobtrusive way as well, to make sure that people are doing, sort of their daily, their routines, and living the life they want to be living.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Thanks for telling. Well, actually, last question: how do people access it? I'm assuming by the website is one way,
Yeah, so
right?
people can go directly to the website,
Yeah.
and at myfloc.com. And if you are a Carallel user, you can access it on your My Care desk or
Yeah.
with your care advocate.
Right. And that's because we buried the lead here, Elizabeth. But last week, was it? Well, I
Hey.
don't know when it became
Yeah,
official, but
last week. Yep.
Carallel and myFloc did announce a partnership, for the purpose of doing what we're talking about here, making financial caregiving easier for families out there. So more to come on that in the future if you are a Carallel user. Um, but I did drop it's myfloc.com. I have that right,
Yep.
Elizabeth?
Yep.
Okay. So I
Perfect.
dropped that in the chat. So we're now over time. Any final thoughts, Elizabeth, on financial caregiving for folks?
I call your mother. I think it's sort of an everyday, or call your father, keep having conversations because you don't know what you're going to hear, and just keep checking in with each other. I think in this world of, unfortunately, sort of scams and things like that, we need to have continuous conversations because that's when you hear what's happening. And it's better for all of us.
Love it. Love it. And I have nothing to add to that. Earlier the better is like you said earlier in the
Yep.
conversation, Elizabeth. Um, so with that, we will close. I am going to drop one more thing in the chat here, which is our caregiver conversation schedule. So and the next session is coming up February 22nd. We're talking about 5 common dementia behaviors and how caregivers can cope. So I'll be joined by a cast of care advocate characters for that discussion on February 22nd. Hope you can join us. Elizabeth, thanks so much for joining me today. So
Loved
nice
it.
to so nice to have you on, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Great. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye
Bye,
bye.
bye now.